The good news of Jesus Christ according to the Gospel of St. Mark in the 8th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd and his disciples together and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. But those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this sinful and adulterous generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. These verses that you just heard come in the middle of the Gospel of Mark. It's really the crux, the crossroads, if you will, of this Gospel. We just heard the very first prediction, if you will, of Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. He's laid that out for these disciples, and then Peter gets into it with Jesus. It doesn't go so well for Peter. And Jesus goes on to define what discipleship is. It is to deny ourselves. Sounds a lot like Lent, doesn't it? Deny ourselves, take up the cross, and follow him. When I was a Bible camp counselor in my very first summer of counseling, we learned the program, the Bible studies, the games, and went into that mode that summer, and I was having a ball. It was a part of my childhood dream, if you will, come true, to get to be one of those counselors. One of the things about being a counselor was this, that we had a little nail cross, similar to what you see in the background on the slide, a little nail cross on a leather strap that we wore around, identified us as counselors, and it was something that we were given upon our commissioning at the beginning of the summer. And the story behind those crosses were that they were made in a little shop in South Dakota at a group home where people of different kinds of abilities were living together, and they figured out who was able to do what and formed an assembly line, and that group made these crosses, and it was their ministry, if you will, to the rest of the world. And those crosses went out from there. Our Bible camp would buy them for the counselors so that we would receive them and hear that story and know that we were a part of something with those folks at that group home and getting that gospel of Jesus out into the world. Reminded of his sacrifice, his own self-denial, his own taking up the cross, his own following in the way of faith. I wore mine proudly. As the summer commenced, and it was a fantastic summer, there was one individual that I remember a little late in the summer. I was working with high schoolers. This young man named Darren was in my group. I was his counselor. He was in my cabin. And we had a lot of fun that week. That guy was maybe a little too fun sometimes. I had to reel him in every now and then, if you know what I mean. A happy-go-lucky guy. Very popular very quickly. In the very last evening of that counseling week, that camping week, he and I were just kind of hanging out and joking back and forth a bit, and then he took on a very kind of solemn visage, if you will. I asked him if he was all right, because it was very uncharacteristic of this otherwise very joyful fellow. And in that moment, I think after that week of being together and building up the relationship through all of those activities that we had done, he felt like he could open up a bit. And open up he did. I had no idea that this happy-go-lucky guy was bearing such weights, worrying about his father and his father's health condition. His mother, who was really struggling with all of that. He had other relationship problems with friends as well. It turned out that this jokester, this fun guy who seemed to not have a care in the world, had every care in the world. I couldn't believe it. And I was used to just working through the program. I was not really quite ready for all of this. A real ministry moment. I wasn't used to denying myself and being open for that. But what he had to say was so important, so meaningful, made such an impression on me. What could I do but listen? And being a young man myself, I didn't have a lot of experience to draw upon, nothing like what he had gone through. So even though I was called his counselor, I didn't really feel like I was in a position to actually counsel him. I could just listen. And after he unloaded all of this and had wept that ugly kind of cry with tears and snot and everything, all I could think of was to take that cross off and hand it to him and tell him, Darren, I don't know what to say about all that, but I'm here for you and I'm praying for you, and I want you to have this. It means an awful lot to me. It took a lot for me to get to the point where I got this. And this is my faith. This is my hope. This is my strength. And I think you need this more than I do. He took it gratefully. He took that cross. And I asked him that he just do one thing, that he carry that with him as a reminder of his strength and God's love for him until he comes up to someone who needs it more than he does. And then to pass it on with that same caveat. I think that's something like what Jesus is calling us to. To set ourselves aside, our designs, our programs, our plans, our own worries, to make room to listen to others, to bear the cross for them, to bear the cross to them, to share our faith in simple words, that this gospel that we're called to may be carried on and carried out. It's no small thing. Jesus is asking us for a reorientation, a loss of the life that we think we knew or think we were all about. An orientation away from ourselves and toward others. And I think that's really what the cross is all about. When we talk about the cross that we must bear, when we talk about Jesus' cross, I think what it's really all about is not us. It's not all about me or all about us, but it's all about others. That's what Jesus was doing on the cross. Giving his life, setting himself aside for others, for all of us. I think we as a culture need to think about that as we watch the news these days and hear so many different things going on. Last Sunday, I addressed the shooting in Parkland, Florida, and that continues to boil over as students share their voices. In them, I'm seeing and hearing echoes of Darren so long ago. They have something to say, and we need to set ourselves aside, we who are the older generations, and really listen to them, because they're crying out to us to save them, really. I don't have the answers, but I think the way is to set ourselves aside, to really listen to them, to hear their pain, to work with them for a better future. A future that fits the way of Jesus Christ a lot more closely. I don't think it's going to be a simple matter, and I know it's going to be a painful one as well, figuring all that out. We may have to let go of things that we thought constituted our lives before. I'll give you a ministry example that I think will be helpful for this congregation as well. My previous call, I'd been doing a Bible study. I know, crazy thing, right? Pastor doing a Bible study. But I gave it up. If you can believe that, I almost couldn't believe it. I thought I'd always be leading a Bible study of some sort during the week. We'd look at the gospel text for the upcoming Sunday, kind of getting ready together, and that group that would meet, and it was a lot of different people at different times. They would start to look forward to what was coming up in the next Sunday, and it was a nice little group. But there came another idea in the ministry. A few people came to me, and some pieces started to float around that began to coalesce, and the idea was to do something more in the midweek for the congregation and for Kennesaw State University, for the school and the students all around us. And as we sat down and planned over basically a summertime, what we came up with was this idea called Dinner Church, and we stole that name from a speaker at the previous youth gathering. But Dinner Church was just that. It was dinner and it was church. We would gather in the fellowship hall and eat a meal together as family, as community. We connected with KSU students, invited them into that as well, and at about halfway through, we'd do a little devotion, have a faith conversation about that text, and then commune with each other right there around the tables where we sat. It was a beautiful thing, our own parishioners sharing communion with KSU students, mothers, fathers communing their children, children communing their parents. It was something that really took hold in that congregation, but in order to do that, to make room in my schedule and in my life, I gave up that Bible study. Never thought I'd do such a thing. But we gave it up in order to make room for something better. You know, I would get half a dozen people for that Bible study, but Dinner Church had 30, 40, 50 people regularly and connected with the greater community as well. That many more people heard the word every week. That many more people shared in the Holy Supper that week. All I had to do was deny myself that Bible study that I thought I would do all my career. But in order to pursue the gospel more thoroughly, in order to get it out there to the community and make connections and relationships that were significant. We had KSU students who became members. We had one who was baptized in that first semester that we had done Dinner Church. I think we had finally stopped thinking about ourselves so much. Denied that. Took up the cross for the greater community, for KSU students, and followed him all the better. And we were blessed by that. What's going on in this congregation in these days is that we're talking about strategic planning, getting closer and closer to a plan that we're looking to present to the council and then to the congregation in order for us all to buy into it, so to speak, and pull together in that ministry and in that process. I know there are things we are going to have to do to deny ourselves. Things that maybe we've always done, maybe things that we'd love to do, things we always envisioned we would do because that's who we are and what we do. But this text, I think, is calling us to something even more and even greater. Maybe Jesus and Peter in this are in a strategic planning meeting, arguing about the direction of the ministry. Peter's looking for it to continue on pretty much as it always has. Jesus is calling them all to a better way, to a higher way, to his way. And that call is for us as well. Amen.